I'm Paige, 29 years old. My mother's voice cuts through the phone like ice when she tells me, "We're not your babysitters, each one for themselves," while my 5-month-old baby burns with fever in my arms. The emergency room doors slide open as I balance my phone between my shoulder and ear, my son's tiny body radiating heat that makes my own blood run cold. "Mom, please, just pick up Tyler from school. I'm at the hospital right now." The fluorescent lights overhead buzz like angry insects while I sign admission forms with shaking hands. But she's already made her choice. The same choice she's been making for over a year while I quietly pay the $1,500 mortgage on her house. The house with the granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that my bank account funded while my own family lives paycheck to paycheck. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt taken for granted by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up funding my family's lifestyle while being treated like their personal ATM with a pulse. It started right after I graduated college with my business degree, magna cum laude, if we're keeping track, though my family never seemed to notice that detail. You know that feeling when you land your first real job and suddenly you have actual money coming in? That rush of independence, of finally being able to afford name-brand groceries and maybe even dinner out once a month? Yeah, well, apparently my family saw that as an opportunity rather than an achievement. Within weeks of my first paycheck depositing into my brand new checking account, my mom started her campaign. It was subtle at first, those carefully timed sighs during family dinners, the way she'd stack bills prominently on the kitchen counter where everyone could see them, the casual mentions of how difficult things have been lately. Classic emotional manipulation disguised as sharing family concerns. "Your father's hours got cut again," she'd say over Sunday pot roast, shooting me these meaningful looks across our childhood dining table. "The bills just keep coming, and we're struggling to keep up with everything." The electric company sent another notice yesterday. She'd pause dramatically, letting the weight of their financial stress settle over the dinner conversation like a heavy blanket. Sometimes I wonder how we're going to make it through this rough patch. Of course, being the good daughter I was raised to be, the one who'd never caused problems, never rebelled, never questioned authority, I offered to help out here and there. $20 for groceries when they seemed particularly stressed about the weekly shopping trip, $50 for their electric bill when the disconnect notice arrived. Small amounts that felt manageable and, honestly, good. Like I was finally contributing something meaningful to my family after 18 years of being supported by them. "You're such a blessing, sweetheart," my mother would say, accepting my folded bills with what seemed like genuine gratitude. "We raised you right. You understand what family means." Those words felt like warm honey, validating every choice I'd made to prioritize family obligations over personal desires throughout my childhood and teenage years. But here's the thing about family dynamics. They have a way of becoming permanent fixtures before you even realize what's happening. What started as occasional help became expected assistance. What began as emergency support evolved into routine financial dependency. And what started as small amounts gradually became significantly larger contributions that required careful budgeting and sacrifice on my part. By the time Fernando and I started seriously dating, I was essentially supporting my parents' household expenses while trying to build my own independent adult life. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was financially helping my parents achieve stability, while my own financial future remained uncertain and dependent on their needs. Fernando understood, or at least he said he did during our long conversations about family obligations and financial responsibility. "Family is family," he'd tell me when I'd occasionally express concern about the mounting amounts leaving my bank account each month. "They raised you, took care of you, sacrificed for your education and opportunities. Now it's your turn to take care of them." It sounded noble when he put it that way. Dutiful. Like the right thing to do. Like proof that I was a good person who understood the value of family loyalty. When Tyler was born 5 years ago, I was riding high on new motherhood and a recent promotion at work that came with a significant salary increase. My paycheck had jumped from barely making ends meet to actually having breathing room, and suddenly there was space in our budget for things like quality baby gear and occasional date nights. That's when my mother presented what she called a real opportunity for the family to move forward together. Their rental house had developed what could only be described as a serious mold problem that was affecting everyone's health. Black stuff was creeping up the bathroom walls like something out of a horror movie, creating that musty smell that never went away no matter how much bleach my mother used or how many air fresheners she strategically placed throughout the house. The landlord was dragging his feet on fixing the problem, claiming it was cosmetic rather than a health hazard, and my mom's asthma was getting worse by the day. "We found this perfect little house for sale," she explained during a Sunday dinner. pulling out printed photos from Zillow like she was showing off vacation pictures. Her eyes were bright with excitement as she spread the papers across our dining table, pointing out features like a real estate agent. "Look at this kitchen and the backyard! Your father could finally have his workshop space." The house was charming, I had to admit. A small craftsman-style home with a welcoming front porch, completely updated kitchen with modern appliances, and a decent-sized backyard with mature trees that would be perfect for Tyler to play in during family visits. Nothing extravagant or showy, but solid and clean and move-in ready. The kind of house that represented the American dream of home ownership and stability. "The thing is," my mother continued, her voice dropping to that serious tone she used for important family discussions, "we'd need help with the down payment and the first few mortgage payments until your father's employment situation stabilizes, and we can take over completely." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "It would just be temporary until we get back on our feet financially. Then the house would be ours free and clear, and you'd never have to worry about us again." Here's where I should have asked more questions. Like, what exactly did a few mortgage payments mean? A couple of months? 6 months? A year? Or when specifically my father's job situation would improve enough for them to take over the full financial responsibility? What was the timeline for this temporary arrangement? But I was caught up in the fantasy of helping my family achieve something they genuinely wanted and needed. The idea that I could be the reason my parents finally owned their own home instead of dealing with negligent landlords felt amazing. It felt like I was finally in a position to give back after years of receiving their support. Looking back now, I realize I was so focused on being the good daughter, the one who could solve problems and make things better, that I ignored the red flags waving frantically in front of my face. I wanted to believe that this was a genuine partnership, a temporary arrangement that would benefit everyone and strengthen our family bonds. So I did what any loving daughter would do. I helped them move. And by helped, I mean I paid for everything. The down payment came directly from my savings account, wiping out 2 years of careful budgeting and financial planning in one transaction. The moving truck, because they needed professional movers to handle their furniture safely, charged to my credit card. The utility deposits for water, gas, electricity, internet, and cable. All of it flowing from my bank account like water from a broken pipe. But here's where it gets really interesting. Even the new furniture became my responsibility. Apparently, their old couch wouldn't fit the aesthetic of the new place. The kitchen table was too small for the beautiful dining room. Their bedroom set looked shabby compared to the updated master suite. One shopping trip to the furniture store turned into 3, then 5, then a complete home makeover that left my credit cards maxed out and my financial cushion completely depleted. "We'll pay you back," my father promised as he signed the purchase documents, his signature confident and steady while mine shook slightly from the financial anxiety already building in my chest. "This is just temporary, until we get back on our feet financially. Once I find steady work again, we'll take over all the payments and you'll be off the hook completely." The mortgage company required proof of stable income, which my parents apparently couldn't provide in sufficient amounts to qualify for the loan on their own. So guess whose name went on all the paperwork as the primary cosigner? That's right, mine. The monthly mortgage payment was $1,500. Not crushing on its own, but definitely noticeable in our budget, especially when combined with Tyler's daycare costs, our own rent, car payments, and the credit card bills from furnishing my parents' new house. Fernando and I had been talking seriously about having another baby, timing our family planning around my stable job and his steady construction work, but now we'd need to wait until my parents took over their house payment. Maybe 6 months, I told myself optimistically. A year at most. Dad's always been good at finding work when he really needs to. But 6 months passed without any mention of them taking over the payments. Then 8 months. Then a year. By the time I worked up the nerve to broach the subject directly, my mother had perfected her response with the skill of a seasoned politician, avoiding difficult questions. "Paige, honey, you know how grateful we are for everything you're doing," she'd say, her voice warm with what seemed like genuine appreciation. "Your father's still looking for something stable and long-term. You know how hard it is for someone his age to find good work these days. The market is just so competitive. Just a little while longer, and then we'll be able to take over completely." The automatic withdrawal from my checking account every month became as routine as buying groceries or paying our own rent. I'd see the notification on my phone, $2,500 withdrawn, First National Mortgage, and just accept it as part of our monthly expenses. Like a utility bill for a house I didn't even live in, couldn't decorate according to my tastes, and visited only for obligatory family dinners. The most frustrating part wasn't even the money itself, though that $1,500 represented a significant chunk of our household income. It was the complete lack of acknowledgement that slowly ate away at my sense of self-worth. Not once, in over a year of mortgage payments, did I receive a thank you card in the mail. Not once did my parents express genuine gratitude during family gatherings or phone conversations. The house had simply become theirs in their minds, and my financial contribution had become as invisible as the foundation supporting the structure, essential but unnoticed. Fernando noticed before I did how this arrangement was fundamentally affecting our own life plans and financial goals. "We've been talking about a second baby for almost 2 years now," he mentioned one evening as we were going over our monthly budget at our small kitchen table. "When do you realistically think we'll be in a financial position to actually start trying?" His question was gentle but pointed, highlighting the elephant in the room that I'd been trying to ignore. That's when the reality hit me like cold water to the face. We were putting our own family planning on indefinite hold so my parents could live comfortably in a house they couldn't afford on their own. We were delaying our dreams, our goals, our future plans to fund theirs. And somehow this arrangement had become so normalized in our daily routine that I hadn't even questioned its long-term sustainability until Fernando forced me to face the truth. You know what's funny about being the family ATM? Everyone gets really comfortable with the arrangement except you. While I was sitting at our cramped kitchen table calculating whether we could afford to take Tyler to Disney World this year, spoiler alert, we absolutely couldn't. My parents were planning their kitchen renovation with granite countertops, subway tile backsplashes, and stainless steel appliances that cost more than our monthly income. "It'll increase the home value significantly," my mother explained when she showed me the contractor estimates during one of our Sunday dinners. The papers were spread across her beautiful dining table like architectural blueprints for a mansion. "We're thinking of adding a breakfast nook too, maybe expanding the pantry space. The kitchen is just begging for these improvements, and property values in this neighborhood are really taking off." I wanted to ask who this "we" included and whether I'd be financing this renovation too, but the words stuck in my throat like peanut butter. That's the problem with family obligations. They make you swallow questions you desperately need to be asking. You start second-guessing your own reasonable concerns because you don't want to appear selfish or ungrateful. Fernando had started making jokes about our 3-bedroom mortgage on a 2-bedroom budget, and honestly, his humor was the only thing keeping me sane some days. He wasn't wrong, though. Between Tyler's ever-increasing expenses, clothes he outgrew every few months, school supplies, birthday parties we couldn't afford to skip, and my parents' house payment, we were living paycheck to paycheck despite both of us having decent, stable jobs. The irony was painful. But whenever I'd mention maybe setting some boundaries around the financial arrangement, Fernando would give me that look. You know the one. Part sympathy, part gentle discouragement. Like I was being unreasonable for questioning something that was obviously the right thing to do. "Paige, they're your parents," he'd say gently, using the same tone he used when explaining to Tyler why he couldn't have ice cream for breakfast. "They took care of you for 18 years. They fed you, clothed you, put you through college. A couple more months of helping them won't kill us." Technically, he was right. It wouldn't literally kill us, but it was slowly suffocating our own future plans, strangling our dreams one monthly payment at a time. The worst part was how completely invisible my sacrifice had become in the day-to-day rhythm of family life. During family dinners at their beautiful new house, the house I was paying for, let's not forget that crucial detail, my parents would casually mention their latest purchases like they were reading items from a grocery list. A new smart TV for the living room because the old one was getting outdated. A garden shed for the backyard because they needed proper storage for their tools. A fancy coffee machine because we deserved to enjoy our morning routine in our golden years. Never once did they preface these announcements with, "Thanks to Paige's generosity, we can afford this." Never once did they acknowledge that their comfortable lifestyle was being directly subsidized by their daughter's family budget. It was like the money magically appeared in their account each month through some divine intervention. No questions asked, no gratitude required, no recognition necessary. Tyler, bless his brutally honest 5-year-old heart, started asking the kinds of questions that cut straight to the bone. "Why is Grandma and Grandpa's house so much bigger and nicer than ours?" he'd point out after our visits, his little face scrunched with genuine curiosity. "They have a playroom and a guest room and a big backyard with swings. Why don't we have a playroom? Why don't we have swings?" How do you explain to a kindergartner that mommy and daddy can't afford a bigger house because they're buying Grandma and Grandpa's house for them? How do you tell your child that his parents are essentially paying 2 mortgages on 1 income? You don't. You just smile and promise that maybe someday we'll have more space, knowing that someday keeps getting pushed further into the future with each passing month. But someday felt like a mirage in the desert, always visible on the horizon, but never actually reachable. Every time I transferred that $1,500, I watched our own dreams get pushed back another month. The second baby Fernando and I had been planning, indefinitely on hold. The family vacation Tyler kept asking about after hearing his classmates talk about their trips to beaches and theme parks? Maybe next year, sweetie. The emergency fund that every financial advisor says you absolutely must have? What emergency fund? Meanwhile, my mother started hosting elaborate dinner parties in her gorgeous dining room, complete with professional catering services and decorative touches that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. "We just love entertaining in our home," she'd tell her friends, gesturing around the space like a proud homeowner who'd earned every square foot through hard work and careful saving. There's something so satisfying about having people over and showing off what we've accomplished. What we've accomplished. The phrase made my teeth clench every time I heard it. I started having this recurring nightmare where I was drowning in paperwork. Mortgage statements, bank transfers, budget spreadsheets, credit card bills, while my family stood on the shore of a beautiful house, waving cheerfully but never throwing me a lifeline. I'd wake up feeling exhausted, like I'd been swimming upstream against a powerful current all night, never making progress toward any destination that mattered to me. The breaking point was building like pressure in a tea kettle, but I was too busy keeping everyone else comfortable to notice that I was about to explode. Have you ever experienced being taken for granted by the people you help most? Drop a comment below about a time when your kindness went completely unappreciated and unacknowledged. I'm starting to think this is more common than any of us want to admit. The breaking point was building long before that terrible phone call, but I was too busy keeping everyone else financially afloat to notice that I was slowly drowning. Fernando could see it, though. He'd watch me review our bank statements each month with this increasingly pinched expression, calculating and recalculating whether we could afford Tyler's upcoming school supplies, or if we needed to wait until the next paycheck to buy groceries, or whether fixing our car's squeaky brakes could be put off another month. "You know this isn't sustainable long-term, right?" he said one evening after I'd spent 20 minutes moving money between accounts, like I was playing some complicated shell game with our finances. We were sitting at our tiny kitchen table, the same table we'd bought when we first got married, the one we kept promising to replace once our finances loosened up. That promise was starting to feel like a joke. "It's temporary," I said automatically, the words feeling stale and unconvincing in my mouth. "Dad's been interviewing for that supervisor position at the factory downtown. Once he gets it, they'll be able to take over the mortgage completely, and we can get back to our normal budget." Even as I spoke, I could hear how hollow my own words sounded. How many times had I repeated this same hopeful script? Fernando looked at me like I was trying to convince myself of something we both knew wasn't true. His expression was gentle but tired, the look of someone who'd been watching his partner struggle and wanted to help but didn't know how. "Paige, it's been 13 months. 13. At what point do we admit this arrangement isn't working for our family?" He was absolutely right, and I hated him for being right because admitting he was right meant admitting so many other uncomfortable truths. It meant acknowledging that my parents had found their golden goose and had no real intention of looking for another solution. It meant recognizing that I'd been systematically played, manipulated into a financial arrangement that benefited everyone except my own nuclear family. But family guilt is a powerful drug, more addictive than anything you can buy on any street corner. Every time I considered having a serious, boundary-setting conversation with my parents about taking over their mortgage, I'd remember all the ways they'd supposedly sacrificed for me growing up. The dance lessons they'd somehow afforded when money was tight. The college application fees they'd paid without complaint. The used car they'd helped me buy when I turned 18 and needed transportation to my first real job. Except, looking back with adult eyes and a more mature understanding of parental responsibilities, I realized their sacrifices had been pretty standard parental obligations. Dance lessons weren't exactly extravagant. Most middle-class parents managed to provide some kind of extracurricular activities for their children. College application fees are part of the expected cost of raising a child who's going to pursue higher education. Helping with a first car is something most parents do when they're financially able. And here I was, going above and beyond anything they'd ever done for me, while being treated like it was my obligation rather than my generous gift. The double standard was starting to make me feel physically sick to my stomach. The month before everything exploded, Tyler came home from kindergarten bouncing with excitement, clutching a crumpled field trip permission slip in his little fist. "We're going to the Science Museum," he announced, practically vibrating with anticipation. "Mrs. Peterson says we'll see real dinosaur bones and everything, and there's a planetarium where you can see all the stars and planets." The cost was $40 per student, 40 measly dollars. In the grand scheme of things, it should have been pocket change. But when I looked at our checking account balance after the mortgage payment had automatically withdrawn, after paying for daycare and groceries and utilities and car insurance, I had to tell my 5-year-old son that maybe he couldn't go on the field trip this time. "Why not, Mommy?" he asked, his little face scrunching with confusion and disappointment. "Sarah's mom said all the kids in our class are going. It's going to be so much fun. We're going to learn about space and dinosaurs and everything. I knelt down to his eye level, looking into those trusting brown eyes that expected me to be able to solve any problem, and tried to find words that wouldn't crush his spirit completely. Well, buddy, sometimes families have to make careful choices about how we spend our money. The field trip costs $40, and we need to make sure we have enough money for other important things first. That night, I cried in the shower until the water ran cold. Here I was, paying for my parents to live in comfort with their granite countertops and professional landscaping and fancy coffee machines, while my own child might miss out on a basic school experience because $40 was too much for our stretched budget. The absurdity and injustice of the situation hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Fernando found me the next morning at 5 a.m., hunched over my laptop at the kitchen table, researching second jobs online. "What are you doing?" he asked, squinting at the screen full of Indeed job listings. Indeed.com was becoming my most frequently visited website, which was a depressing commentary on our financial situation. Looking for weekend work? Part-time evening stuff. Maybe something I can do from home after Tyler goes to bed, I said, scrolling through postings for virtual assistants, data entry positions, customer service representatives. Tyler needs things, and we need things. And I can't keep choosing between my parents' comfort and my son's opportunities. That's when Fernando sat me down for what he later called our come to Jesus conversation. He pulled out a folder I didn't even know he'd been keeping. A manila folder carefully organized with bank statements, budget spreadsheets, and calculations showing exactly how much my parents' house was costing our family in both immediate expenses and lost opportunities. "Look at this," he said, spreading the papers across our coffee table like evidence in a courtroom. "In the past year alone, we've paid $18,000 toward their mortgage. 18,000, Paige. Do you realize what we could have done with $18,000 if we'd kept it in our own family budget?" I stared at those numbers like they were written in a foreign language I'd never learned. $18,000. On paper, spread across Fernando's carefully organized documents, it looked enormous. A life-changing amount of money. But in monthly installments of $1,500, it had felt manageable, almost reasonable, necessary even. That's how financial manipulation works. Breaking down overwhelming numbers into smaller, seemingly affordable pieces until you don't realize how much you've actually sacrificed for someone else's benefit. "We could have put Tyler in that private pre-K program you wanted so badly," Fernando continued, his voice gentle but increasingly firm as he pointed to specific line items in our budget analysis. "The one with the advanced learning curriculum and the smaller class sizes. We could have taken that family vacation to Disney World that Tyler keeps asking about after hearing his friends talk about their trips. We could have started trying for baby number 2 without constantly worrying about whether we can afford another mouth to feed and another college tuition to save for." The baby conversation had been shelved so many times over the past year that I'd started to wonder if Fernando had fundamentally changed his mind about expanding our family. We'd been almost ready to start trying for over 12 months, but every month seemed to bring new expenses or financial obligations that pushed our timeline back further and further into an uncertain future. "Your parents' house has appreciated significantly in value since they purchased it," Fernando said, pulling out fresh Zillow printouts he'd apparently been tracking like a stock portfolio. "It's now worth $30,000 more than what they originally paid for it. They're sitting on equity that you helped them build through your monthly payments, while our own net worth has essentially stagnated because we can't save for a down payment on our own house." That revelation hit differently than all the other financial realities we'd been discussing. The idea that my financial sacrifice had actually increased their net worth while ours remained flat felt like a betrayal I hadn't even considered. They weren't just living in a house I was paying for. They were building personal wealth using funds that should have been securing my own family's future. The injustice of it made my chest feel tight with suppressed anger. Tyler chose that exact moment to come running into the living room, wearing his Batman pajamas and carrying his beloved stuffed elephant under one arm. His hair was still messy from his afternoon nap, and he had that sleepy, slightly confused expression that 5-year-olds get when they wake up disoriented. "Daddy, can we get ice cream tonight? Please, please, please?" he asked, bouncing on his toes with the kind of hopeful energy that only children possess. "Tommy's mom took him to get ice cream yesterday, and he said it was the best day ever." I watched Fernando's face soften as he looked at our son, but there was something genuinely pained in his expression too. The look of a parent who wants to give their child simple pleasures, but feels constrained by circumstances beyond their control. "Not tonight, buddy. Maybe this weekend," Fernando said, ruffling Tyler's hair affectionately. "You always say maybe this weekend," Tyler said with the brutal honesty that only 5-year-olds can deliver without meaning to hurt anyone's feelings. "We never actually get ice cream anymore. We never do fun stuff like other families do." After we tucked Tyler into bed with promises of ice cream that I honestly wasn't sure we could keep, Fernando and I sat in our living room in heavy silence. The contrast with my parents' house was stark and getting harder to ignore every day. Their spacious rooms filled with new furniture and expensive decorations, while we sat on our secondhand couch in our cramped space, surrounded by Tyler's toys because we didn't have anywhere else to store them or the money to buy proper storage solutions. "I'll talk to them," I said finally, the words feeling both necessary and terrifying. The thought of having a direct conversation with my parents about money made my stomach churn with anxiety. "When?" Fernando asked, and I could hear both hope and skepticism in his voice. "Soon. Really soon this time. Paige, you've been saying soon for months now." Meanwhile, Tyler is starting to ask questions about why other kids get to do things he can't. He's beginning to notice that we don't have what other families have, and that's not fair to him. That observation stung because it was completely accurate. Tyler had recently started asking why we never went to restaurants like his friend Jake's family did every Friday night. Why we didn't have a backyard with a swing set and sandbox like Grandma and Grandpa's house. Why Mommy always looked worried and stressed when she opened mail from the bank or credit card companies. Children notice everything, especially the things you desperately hope you're hiding from them. They're like emotional detectives picking up on tension and anxiety, even when you think you're maintaining a cheerful facade. The irony of our situation was becoming impossible to ignore. My parents were living their absolute best life in comfortable retirement, hosting dinner parties and planning home improvements, while my own child was learning to accept disappointment and financial limitation as normal parts of his everyday experience. They were enjoying the security and stability I was providing while my own family lived with constant financial anxiety and delayed dreams. But confronting family about money felt like navigating a minefield blindfolded. How do you tell the people who raised you that their financial dependence on you is actively hurting your ability to raise your own children? How do you set reasonable boundaries with people who've never acknowledged that boundaries might be necessary or appropriate? My mother had a particularly effective way of making any financial conversation about emotional guilt rather than practical logistics. "After everything we've done for you," was her favorite conversation starter when money topics arose. "All the sacrifices we made when you were growing up, all the opportunities we provided." Asif, 18 years of basic parenting created a lifetime debt that could never be fully paid or forgiven. The following weekend, we made our usual trip to my parents' house for Sunday dinner, and I watched Tyler play in their beautiful backyard with the professional landscaping and the expensive playset they'd installed for when the grandchildren visit. The irony wasn't lost on me that Tyler had access to a better play area at the house I was financially supporting than he did at his own home. What would you think if you discovered your family was building personal wealth with your money, while your own child had to go without basic childhood experiences? Let me know in the comments below. I'm curious if I'm overreacting, or if this situation is as unfair as it feels to me. Sunday dinners at my parents' house had become these elaborate theatrical productions where we all pretended everything was perfectly normal. My mother would serve multi-course meals in her gorgeous dining room, the one with the expensive chandelier and matching china cabinet, while I sat there mentally calculating whether we could afford to stop for gas on the way home. She'd launch into detailed discussions about her latest home improvement projects and the new seasonal decorations she'd ordered online, while I quietly reviewed our grocery list in my head to figure out what items we could skip this week to stay within our tight budget. But here's what I started noticing during those increasingly uncomfortable family gatherings. My mother's complete and consistent lack of genuine interest in Tyler and baby Marcus. Oh, she'd make the appropriate grandmotherly sounds and gestures when we first arrived, commenting on how much Tyler had grown or how cute Marcus looked in his little outfit. But within minutes, sometimes even seconds, she'd pivot back to discussing her own concerns and interests, as if my children were merely decorative objects rather than actual human beings deserving of attention and engagement. "Don't call me Grandma," she'd reminded Tyler for what felt like the 100th time when he'd accidentally slipped up the previous weekend. Her voice carried that sharp edge of irritation that suggested this correction was becoming a genuine annoyance for her. "I've told you repeatedly, it's Barbara. The name Grandma makes me feel ancient, and I'm far too young and vibrant to be called something so aging." Tyler had looked genuinely confused and a little hurt, glancing at me for guidance on how to navigate this strange family rule that seemed to exist nowhere else in his social world. Most kids his age couldn't imagine their grandparents being called anything but Grandma and Grandpa. It's such a fundamental part of the grandparent-grandchild relationship that my mother's rejection of the title felt like a rejection of the role itself. And honestly, looking back now, I think that's exactly what it was. Fernando noticed the emotional distance too, and he was less inclined than I was to make excuses for behavior that was obviously hurtful to our children. "She's really cold with Tyler and Marcus, isn't she?" he'd mentioned after one particularly awkward visit, where my mother had barely acknowledged baby Marcus, even when he'd reached his chubby little arms toward her from my lap, clearly wanting to be picked up and cuddled by his grandmother. That's just her personality, I'd said automatically, reciting the same excuse I'd been making for my mother's emotional unavailability since Tyler was born. She's not the warm and fuzzy type. Some people just aren't naturally affectionate with children. It doesn't mean she doesn't care about them. But watching her interact with my children while I funded her comfortable lifestyle was starting to feel fundamentally different than simply accepting her personality quirks. Here I was, making significant financial sacrifices to provide her with security and comfort, and she couldn't be bothered to engage meaningfully with the grandchildren whose college funds were being depleted to pay for her granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The breaking point should have been obvious, building like storm clouds gathering on the horizon for months. But denial is an incredibly powerful psychological defense mechanism, especially when you've invested so much emotionally and financially in believing that a dysfunctional situation is actually normal and healthy. That particular Sunday in late fall, Tyler had been excited all week about showing Barbara the special art project he'd been working on at school. It was one of those adorable kindergarten masterpieces, a carefully constructed family tree made with construction paper leaves, each one labeled with a family member's name in his shaky 5-year-old handwriting. He'd spent extra time during art class adding decorative details and had even asked his teacher for extra leaves so he could include extended family members. "Look, Barbara," he said, practically vibrating with pride as he held up his artwork for her inspection. "I made our family tree. Mrs. Johnson helped me spell all the names correctly. That's you and Grandpa on this branch, and that's me and Mommy and Daddy and baby Marcus on this branch. See how I drew little faces on each leaf?" My mother glanced at the construction paper creation for exactly 2 seconds before turning back to her conversation with Fernando about some neighborhood drama involving property line disputes and homeowner association politics. "That's nice, dear," she said dismissively, not even taking the paper from Tyler's outstretched hands or asking any follow-up questions about his creative process. I watched my 5-year-old's face transform from excited anticipation to confused disappointment, then finally to resignation. The light literally went out of his eyes as he realized that his grandmother, the woman whose house he was standing in, the woman whose comfortable lifestyle was made possible by his parents' financial sacrifice, couldn't spare 30 seconds to properly examine and appreciate his heartfelt artistic effort. That's when something fundamental shifted inside me, not dramatically, more like a heavy door closing quietly in a distant room of my heart. I was paying for this woman's comfortable retirement, while she couldn't be bothered to show basic interest in her grandson's creative expression or emotional needs. Fernando saw the whole interaction unfold, and I caught the look of barely contained anger that crossed his face as he witnessed Tyler's obvious hurt. Without missing a beat, Fernando swooped in to provide the attention and validation that Barbara had withheld. "This is absolutely amazing, Tyler," Fernando said, examining every detail of the family tree with genuine enthusiasm. "I love how you use different colors for each family member. And look at all these decorative details you added. Can you tell me about this part here? And what about this special design you drew on Mommy's leaf?" Tyler's face immediately brightened as Fernando gave him the focused attention he'd been seeking. But I caught the meaningful look Fernando shot me over Tyler's head, a look that clearly communicated we both knew something was seriously wrong with this family dynamic. That evening, after we'd returned to our modest house with its secondhand furniture and cramped rooms, Tyler asked the question that shattered my heart into a million pieces. "Why doesn't Barbara like my pictures, Mommy? Did I do something wrong?" How do you explain emotional neglect to a 5-year-old child? How do you tell your innocent, loving child that some adults are simply incapable of showing appropriate interest in children, even their own grandchildren? How do you protect a child's sense of self-worth when the adults who should be celebrating their existence are treating them like inconveniences? You don't. You just hold them a little tighter and promise yourself that you'll do better, that you'll protect them from people who can't appreciate how precious and deserving of love they are. But lying in bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the contrast. My mother, living comfortably in a house I was providing, couldn't be bothered to engage with the grandchildren whose college funds were being depleted to pay her mortgage. The warning signs were everywhere, but I'd become an expert at explaining them away. Like the time my mother forgot Tyler's 6th birthday completely. Not a card, not a phone call, nothing. When I mentioned it during our next conversation, she acted annoyed that I'd brought it up. "You know how bad I am with dates?" she said, as if forgetting your grandchild's birthday was a quirky personality trait rather than basic neglect. "Besides, you never told me what he wanted anyway." Except, I had told her. 3 weeks beforehand, I'd specifically mentioned that Tyler was hoping for a bike. I'd even sent her a link to one at Target that was on sale. But apparently asking her to remember her grandson's birthday while I paid her mortgage was too much to expect. Fernando was getting less diplomatic about the situation. She forgot his birthday but remembered to buy herself that expensive coffee machine the same week, he pointed out. Her priorities are pretty clear. What do you think about grandparents who take financial help but can't be bothered to remember their grandchildren's birthdays? Share your thoughts below. The pattern became impossible to ignore once I started looking for it. Family events where Tyler and Marcus were treated like background noise, while my mother focused entirely on adult conversations. Holidays where she'd complain about the noise when the boys were just being normal kids. The way she'd stiffen whenever Marcus cried or fussed, like his baby behavior was a personal inconvenience. Some people just aren't natural with children, I told myself. That doesn't make her a bad person. But combined with her financial dependence on our family, her emotional distance started feeling less like a personality quirk and more like selfishness. The month before everything exploded, Marcus had started walking. Anyone with grandchildren knows this is supposed to be a major milestone, worth celebrating and documenting. When I called to share the exciting news, my mother's response was lukewarm at best. That's nice, dear. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about the water heater. It's making strange noises, and I think it might need to be replaced soon. Even my baby's first steps took a backseat to discussing household maintenance for the house I was paying for. The house where she lived comfortably while showing minimal interest in the grandchildren whose future I was funding. Fernando started making comments about how different things were when we visited his parents. His mother would drop everything to get on the floor and play with Tyler. His father would spend hours pushing Marcus on the baby swing they'd installed specifically for our visits. The contrast was stark and painful. Maybe we should start spending more Sunday afternoons with my parents, Fernando suggested. Tyler always comes home happier from their house. He was right. Tyler would talk for hours about the activities Grandma Rosa had planned, or the stories Grandpa Miguel had told him. Their attention was focused and genuine, unlike the distracted tolerance he received from my mother. But admitting that my parents weren't good grandparents felt like admitting I'd been wrong about so many things. If they couldn't be bothered to engage with Tyler and Marcus, what did that say about the sacrifices I was making for them? If they could ignore their own grandchildren's milestones while accepting our financial support, what did that say about their character? The cognitive dissonance was exhausting. I was funding the comfortable retirement of people who treated my children like minor inconveniences. I was sacrificing my family's financial stability for people who couldn't remember a birthday or celebrate a first step. Looking back, I should have seen the phone call coming. Should have recognized that someone who couldn't show basic interest in her grandchildren wouldn't suddenly become helpful in a crisis. But denial runs deep, especially when you've spent years making excuses for someone's behavior. The stage was set for the moment that would change everything. All it took was one emergency to reveal exactly how much my sacrifices had meant to the people I was sacrificing for. Tuesday morning started like any other day in our chaotic household. Fernando left for work at his construction site 2 hours away. Tyler was getting ready for kindergarten, and baby Marcus was babbling in his high chair while I tried to convince him that mashed bananas were actually delicious. If you've ever had young children, you know how quickly normal can become catastrophic. 1 minute everything's fine, the next minute you're in full crisis mode wondering how life went sideways so fast. It was around 10 in the morning when I first noticed Marcus felt warm. Not unusual. Babies run hot sometimes, especially when they're teething. But by noon, that warmth had become genuine fever. By 2 o'clock, I was genuinely worried. When I took his temperature and saw 102.8 degrees, my stomach dropped. Marcus was only 5 months old. Fevers in babies that young aren't something you wait out or treat with baby Tylenol. They're something you take seriously and handle immediately. I called Fernando first, but he was at a job site with spotty cell service. The call went straight to voicemail, and I knew from experience it might be hours before he could check messages. His construction crew was working on a tight deadline for a commercial building project, and the foreman didn't allow personal calls during work hours. Tyler's school was supposed to end at 3:15. It was now 2:30, and I needed to get Marcus to the emergency room immediately. His fever was climbing, and he'd become listless in that way that makes every parental alarm bell go off at once. This is where the family support system was supposed to kick in. You know, grandparents who live 4 blocks from your child's school and could easily pick him up in an emergency. Grandparents whose mortgage you've been paying for over a year, creating a comfortable life for them with the understanding that family helps family. I strapped Marcus into his car seat, his little body radiating heat that made my hands shake as I buckled the safety harness. He wasn't crying anymore, which somehow felt worse than if he'd been screaming. Sick babies who go quiet are babies who need immediate medical attention. The drive to the hospital felt like it took forever, though it was probably only 15 minutes. Marcus dozed fitfully in his car seat while I spoke soothing words I wasn't sure he could hear. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's going to make sure you're okay. The doctors will know what to do." At a red light, I pulled out my phone and called my mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice cheerful and relaxed. Hi, sweetie. What's going on? Mom, I'm on my way to the emergency room with Marcus. His fever is really high and I need to get him seen immediately. Can you please pick up Tyler from school? You're only 4 blocks away from his elementary school. The pause that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When she finally spoke, her voice had gone completely cold. Paige, we've talked about this before. I'm not a babysitter. Each one for themselves. I sat there at that red light, my 5-month-old baby burning with fever in the back seat, and tried to process what I'd just heard. Each one for themselves. From the woman whose mortgage I'd been paying for 13 months. From the grandmother of the child I needed help protecting. Mom, this isn't babysitting, this is an emergency. Marcus is really sick and I just need you to pick Tyler up from school so I can focus on getting medical care for the baby. That's not my responsibility, she replied flatly. You chose to have children. Dealing with their problems is your job, not mine. The light turned green. Cars behind me honked, but I couldn't move. I sat there absorbing the reality of what my mother had just said. In my moment of genuine crisis, when I needed family support most, she'd chosen to remind me that I was on my own. I have to go, I managed to say. My baby needs medical attention. I hung up and called my neighbor Sarah, a woman I barely knew beyond friendly waves across the fence. She answered immediately and didn't hesitate for even a second. Of course I'll pick up Tyler, she said. Don't even worry about it. Take care of that sweet baby. Tyler can stay here as long as you need. The emergency room was controlled chaos. That special kind of organized madness that happens when medical professionals are dealing with multiple crises simultaneously. I checked Marcus in at the triage desk, his fever now at 103.1 degrees, and tried to stay calm while explaining his symptoms to the nurse. 5 months old with a high fever, she noted, immediately flagging our case as urgent. We'll get him back to a room right away. Babies this age don't mess around with fevers. Within minutes, we were in a small examination room where a pediatric emergency physician began checking Marcus over. Blood draws, temperature monitoring, checking for signs of serious infection. The works. All I could do was hold my baby's tiny hand and watch medical professionals work to figure out what was wrong. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Picked up Tyler. He's having a snack and doing homework. Don't rush. We're fine here. From a neighbor I barely knew. The kindness hit me harder than it should have, probably because it contrasted so sharply with the coldness I'd received from my own mother an hour earlier. Here was a woman with no obligation to help, jumping in without hesitation, while my mother, whose house I was literally paying for, had told me I was on my own. Fernando finally called back around 6 o'clock, panic clear in his voice. I just got your messages. Is Marcus okay? Are you okay? Where's Tyler? Marcus is stable, I said, exhaustion making my voice sound hollow. They're running tests, but they think it might be a viral infection. Tyler is with our neighbor Sarah. She picked him up from school when... I paused, not sure how to finish that sentence. When what? When my mother told me she wasn't a babysitter and hung up on me. Silence on Fernando's end. Then quietly, she what? I explained the conversation, watching nurses come and go while Marcus slept fitfully under hospital blankets. Fernando listened without interrupting, but I could hear his breathing change as I described my mother's response to our family emergency. I'm leaving work now, he said finally. I'll be there in 2 hours. Can Sarah keep Tyler until I can pick him up? She already said yes. She even helped him with his homework and... My voice cracked. Fernando, she made him brownies to take to school tomorrow. She made my son brownies while my mother couldn't be bothered to pick him up during a medical emergency. That's when it really hit me. A neighbor who owed me nothing had spent her afternoon caring for my child, helping with homework, and thinking ahead to his needs for the next day. Meanwhile, my mother, who owed me 13 months of mortgage payments, had told me we were each on our own. The doctor returned with test results around 8 o'clock. Good news, she said with a tired smile. It's a viral infection, nothing serious. His fever should break in the next day or two. Keep him hydrated, monitor his temperature, and bring him back if anything changes. Relief flooded through me so completely that I almost cried. Marcus was going to be fine. My baby was going to be okay. But as that immediate crisis subsided, another realization was taking its place. A cold, clear understanding of exactly where my family stood in my mother's priorities. Fernando arrived at the hospital looking exhausted and worried, still wearing his work clothes and smelling like sawdust. He held Marcus while I gathered our things, and I could see him studying our son's face for signs of illness. He looks better, Fernando said finally. More like himself. Yeah, the fever broke about an hour ago. He should be back to normal in a day or two. We drove to Sarah's house in relative silence, both of us processing the day's events. When we knocked on her door, Tyler came running, throwing himself into Fernando's arms with the enthusiasm of a child who'd been worried about his little brother. "Is Marcus okay?" Tyler asked, his 5-year-old face serious with concern. "Sarah said he was sick, and that's why I got to come here for dinner. He's going to be fine," I assured him. The doctors made him feel better. Sarah appeared with Tyler's backpack and the container of brownies she'd promised. "He was wonderful company," she said, and I could tell she meant it. We built a fort in the living room after homework, and he helped me make dinner. "You've got a great kid there." "Thank you," I said, meaning it more than I'd ever meant those words before. "I can't tell you how much this meant to us." "That's what neighbors are for," she replied simply. As we drove home, Tyler chattering about his adventure at Sarah's house, and Fernando checking on Marcus at every red light, I found myself thinking about that phrase, "That's what neighbors are for." What about "that's what family is for"? Apparently, that didn't apply when your family had decided you were on your own. That night, after Tyler was asleep and Marcus was resting comfortably, I sat at our kitchen table with our bank statements spread in front of me. Fernando joined me with 2 cups of coffee, and we stared at the numbers in silence. 13 months of mortgage payments. $18,000. All of it flowing to people who couldn't be bothered to help during our family's crisis. "What are you thinking?" Fernando asked quietly. I looked at him across our small kitchen table, in our modest house, thinking about our neighbor's kindness and my mother's coldness. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that it's time to let my family learn what each one for themselves actually means." I spent the rest of that night awake, not because Marcus needed monitoring. He was sleeping peacefully and his fever had broken completely, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying the events of the day. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my mother's voice. "Each one for themselves." The phrase kept echoing in my head like a slogan I couldn't shake. Here I was, lying in my modest bedroom in my small house, having spent the evening in an emergency room with my sick baby, while my mother slept comfortably in the house I was paying for. The house she could afford because I had chosen to put family first, until the moment when I needed family to put me first. Fernando was awake too. I could tell by his breathing that he was staring at the ceiling just like I was, probably processing the same bitter realization that had been building for months but had crystallized completely today. "You're going to cancel the mortgage payments, aren't you?" he said quietly into the darkness. "I think I have to. I think you do too." We lay there in silence for a while longer, and I thought about Sarah's kindness, how she'd dropped everything to help a neighbor in crisis, how she'd fed my son dinner and helped with homework and thought ahead to pack him brownies for school, how she'd done all of this for a family she barely knew, asking for nothing in return except the knowledge that she'd helped when help was needed. The contrast was so stark it felt almost comical. My neighbor, who owed me nothing, had spent her entire afternoon caring for my family. My mother, who owed me over $18,000, couldn't spare 20 minutes to pick up her grandson from school. At 7 in the morning, I called the bank. "First National Mortgage, this is Jennifer. How can I help you?" "Hi, this is Paige Wilson. I need to remove the automatic payment authorization from my checking account for mortgage loan number." I read off the account number I'd memorized from months of reviewing statements. "Can I ask the reason for the payment modification?" I paused, thinking about how to explain that the people I'd been financially supporting had just demonstrated exactly how little my family meant to them. "The borrowers are ready to take over their own payments," I said finally. It seemed like the most diplomatic way to phrase it. "I'll need to notify the primary borrowers of this change," Jennifer explained. "They'll receive a call later today to arrange new payment methods." "I understand. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "No, that covers everything. Thank you." I hung up and sat in our kitchen, drinking coffee and watching Marcus play happily in his bouncy seat. His fever was completely gone, and he was back to his normal, cheerful self, babbling at his toys and kicking his little legs with enthusiasm. The crisis had passed, but the clarity it had provided remained. Tyler bounded into the kitchen around 8, full of excitement about the brownies Sarah had made for his school lunch. "Mom, can we make brownies sometime? Sarah showed me how, and it looks really fun." "Absolutely," I said, realizing it was something we should have been doing all along instead of stretching our budget to cover other people's comfort. Fernando left for work with a kiss and a meaningful look. "Let me know how today goes," he said quietly, and I knew he meant the inevitable phone calls from my parents when the bank contacted them. I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang at 10:47 a.m. "Paige, what the hell is going on?" My mother's voice was sharp with panic. "The bank just called and said you canceled the mortgage payments. They want to know how we're going to pay going forward." I took a deep breath, surprised by how calm I felt. "Each one for themselves, Mom. Remember?" Silence. Then, "What does that mean? What are you talking about?" "Yesterday, when I called you because my baby was burning up with fever and I needed help getting Tyler from school, You told me you weren't a babysitter and that it was each one for themselves. So I figured you'd want to handle your own mortgage payments too. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped completely. When my mother finally spoke, her voice had that dangerous edge I remembered from childhood, the tone that meant someone was about to get in serious trouble and face consequences they wouldn't soon forget. You cannot be serious right now, Paige. You're throwing a childish tantrum because I couldn't drop everything to help with your childcare emergency? Are you kidding me right now? The fact that she was calling Marcus's genuine medical emergency a childcare issue told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed the situation. In her mind, my sick baby was an inconvenience that should have been my problem alone, but her mortgage was somehow a sacred family obligation that I had no right to question. I'm not throwing a tantrum, I said calmly, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I'm simply taking your advice about family responsibilities. You said each one for themselves, so I'm applying that philosophy consistently to our financial arrangement. That's completely different, and you know it, she snapped, her voice rising to that pitch that meant she was losing control of the conversation. How is it different? Yesterday you told me that dealing with my children's problems was my job, not yours. Today I'm telling you that dealing with your mortgage payments is your job, not mine. It seems perfectly consistent to me. I could hear my father in the background, asking what was happening, followed by muffled conversation as my mother covered the phone to fill him in on this latest family crisis. When she came back on the line, her tone had shifted to the manipulative sweetness she used when she wanted something, the voice she'd perfected over decades of getting her way through emotional manipulation. Honey, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding here. Yesterday was just... I was having a particularly bad day, and I spoke more harshly than I intended. You know I love Tyler and Marcus with all my heart. I just wasn't thinking clearly when you called. I was overwhelmed with my own stress and problems. Mom, you've never picked them up from school. Not once in 5 years. You've never babysat them. Not even for an hour when Fernando and I needed a date night. You forgot Tyler's birthday completely last month. You can't even remember Marcus's middle name. This wasn't about having one bad day. This was about showing me exactly where your priorities lie when push comes to shove. That's not fair, Paige. You know I'm not naturally good with children. That doesn't mean I don't care about them deeply. Some people just aren't the hands-on grandparent type, and that's okay. There are different ways to show love and support. Maybe that's true, but it does mean I shouldn't be expected to prioritize your comfort and financial security over my own family's stability and future. More background conversation, then my father's voice suddenly on the line, using his most authoritative tone. Paige, you're being completely unreasonable and selfish. We had an understanding, an agreement. You can't just pull the rug out from under us like this without warning. What agreement was that, Dad? Because I don't remember agreeing to pay your mortgage indefinitely while being told I'm completely on my own during family emergencies. I don't remember signing a contract that said my financial obligations to you were permanent, but your family obligations to me were non-existent. You know exactly what I mean. We've been counting on this help to maintain our quality of life. You can't just suddenly decide to abandon family responsibilities when things get slightly difficult. The irony was absolutely stunning. They'd been counting on my help and support, but when I'd counted on theirs during a genuine medical crisis involving their own grandchild, I'd been told I was on my own. Somehow, my financial obligations to them were sacred and unchangeable, but their family obligations to me were completely optional and subject to their moods and convenience. My phone was buzzing constantly with text messages, my mother trying another approach through written communication. Please call me back. We need to work this out like adults. Family doesn't abandon family like this during difficult times. Family doesn't abandon family. Such rich, hypocritical words from someone who'd abandoned her daughter and grandson during a medical emergency just 24 hours earlier. The lack of self-awareness was truly breathtaking. Fernando called during his lunch break, his voice filled with concern. How's it going with the family situation? About as well as expected. Mom called me unreasonable and childish. Dad said I was pulling the rug out from under them, and now they're sending text messages about how family doesn't abandon family. The complete lack of self-awareness is really something else, Fernando said. Are you having any second thoughts about this decision? Not even a little bit. Tyler asked this morning if we can take a family vacation this summer, and for the first time in over a year, I realized I might actually be able to say yes instead of making up excuses about why we can't afford it. That afternoon, my sister called. I hadn't heard from Lisa in months. She lived across the country, and we'd never been particularly close. But apparently, family emergencies bring out the flying monkeys. Paige, Mom called me crying. She says you've completely cut them off financially and won't return their calls. What's going on? I explained the situation calmly, starting with the year plus of mortgage payments and ending with my mother's response to Marcus's medical emergency. Lisa listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. Okay, she said finally. That does sound pretty harsh on Mom's part. But Paige, they're retired and on a fixed income. They can't just suddenly come up with $1,500 a month. Then they shouldn't have bought a house they couldn't afford, I replied. And they definitely shouldn't have treated me like their personal ATM while telling me I was on my own when I needed help. So what happens now? They lose the house? I honestly don't know, Lisa. Maybe they sell and downsize to something they can actually afford. Maybe they find a way to make the payments work. But either way, it's not going to be my problem anymore. That seems harsh. You know what's harsh? Working 2 jobs and still not being able to afford a family vacation because you're paying someone else's mortgage. Having to tell your 5-year-old he can't go on a school field trip because $40 is too much for your budget after you've sent $1,500 to your parents. Lisa was quiet for a moment. I didn't realize it was affecting Tyler. It's been affecting everything, Lisa. Our ability to save for our own house, our plans for another baby, Tyler's activities, our family experiences. Everything has been on hold so Mom and Dad can live comfortably in retirement. The rest of that week passed in a blur of phone calls, text messages, and what I can only describe as family tantrum. My parents tried every approach in their manipulation playbook: anger, guilt, bargaining, emotional blackmail. Nothing worked. By Friday, my father left a voicemail that crossed a line I didn't even know existed. Paige, your mother is so upset about this that I'm worried about her health. If something happens to her because of the stress you're causing, that's on you. I played that message for Fernando when he got home from work. We sat in our kitchen listening to my father try to make me responsible for my mother's medical status because I'd stopped funding their lifestyle. That's emotional abuse, Fernando said flatly. That's straight-up emotional manipulation designed to make you feel guilty for setting boundaries. He was right, and hearing it said out loud helped me see the situation more clearly. This wasn't about family loyalty or temporary financial help. This was about control and conditioning that had been years in the making. Saturday morning brought the final straw. I was outside with Tyler and Marcus, enjoying the first warm day of spring, when my parents' car pulled up in our driveway. They climbed out looking like they were attending a funeral. Grim faces, dark clothing, the whole dramatic production. "We need to talk," my mother announced, walking toward me like she owned the place. "No, we don't," I said calmly, picking up Marcus from his blanket on the grass. "We've said everything that needs to be said. You're destroying this family," my father declared. "You're being selfish and vindictive, and you're turning your back on people who sacrificed everything for you." Tyler, my sweet 5-year-old, was watching this whole scene with worried eyes. That's when my protective instincts kicked in completely. Nobody was going to traumatize my children with family drama. "Tyler, take your soccer ball to the backyard," I said gently. "Daddy's inside if you need anything." After Tyler was out of earshot, I turned back to my parents. "You need to leave. Now." "We're not leaving until we resolve this," my mother said. "There's nothing to resolve. You made your position clear when you told me I was on my own during a family emergency. I'm simply treating you the same way." "That phone call was different and you know it," my mother snapped. "I was having a bad day." "Mom, you've had a bad day for Tyler's entire life. You've shown minimal interest in your grandchildren while I've spent over a year funding your retirement. That dynamic is over." That's when my mother said the words that ended our relationship permanently. "Fine. If that's how you want to be, then you and those little brats are no longer welcome in our house anyway. Don't bother coming around anymore." She called my children little brats. The grandchildren whose college funds had been depleted to pay for her comfortable lifestyle were little brats, who were no longer welcome in the house I'd bought for her. I looked at my parents standing in my driveway, demanding that I continue financing their lives while making it clear that my children meant nothing to them. The decision became crystal clear. "Perfect," I said. "That works out well, since you're no longer welcome here either. And just so we're clear, the $1,500 you're not getting from me every month, maybe you can use it to work on your grandmother skills. Though honestly, I wouldn't hold your breath on that front." They left in a huff, my mother making dramatic statements about how I'd regret this decision and how family comes first, the same woman who'd just told me my children weren't welcome in her home. That afternoon, I called Sarah and invited her family over for dinner. Not to vent about my family drama, but because I wanted Tyler and Marcus to see what healthy relationships looked like. I wanted them to understand that kindness and generosity should flow both ways. We grilled burgers in our small backyard. While Tyler and Sarah's daughter played on the swing set Fernando had finally been able to afford and install now that our budget had opened up. Marcus crawled around on a blanket, babbling happily while Sarah's husband helped Fernando with some home improvement project they'd been planning. This is what family is supposed to feel like, I realized. Reciprocal. Supportive. Genuine. People who show up because they care, not because they want something. Fernando found me later that evening, sitting on our front porch and watching the sunset. "How are you feeling about everything?" "Relieved," I said, surprising myself with how true that was. For the first time in over a year, I'm not dreading the monthly mortgage payment. Tyler can go on his field trip next week. We can start planning that vacation, maybe even start trying for baby number 3. And your parents? I thought about that for a minute. I'm sad about what they chose, but I'm not responsible for their choices, and I'm not responsible for fixing their consequences. They wanted each one for themselves, so that's what they get. 6 months later, we took Tyler and Marcus to Disney World. 6 months after that, Fernando and I found out we were expecting our 3rd child. Sarah and her family became our chosen family. The grandparents our children deserved, the support system we'd needed all along. My parents? They sold their house 3 months after I stopped paying the mortgage. They moved into a small apartment that they could actually afford on their retirement income. I heard through my sister that they complained constantly about their ungrateful daughter, who'd abandoned them in their time of need. I never responded to those messages. Some bridges burn for good reasons, and some distance is necessary for healing. My children deserved better than grandparents who saw them as burdens, and my family deserved better than being treated like an ATM. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself and setting healthy boundaries. Sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into.